My name is Hilda Carter, and I was 36 years old when the message arrived. I remember that detail clearly, not because 36 felt significant, but because I had just started believing that this was it, that this version of my life, imperfect but stable, was the one I would grow old inside. I had been with Daniel for 8 years. We met in our late 20s, moved in together, quickly built routines that felt solid enough to lean on. Grocery lists on the fridge, inside jokes that didn't need explaining, arguments that ended in silence, then forgiveness. From the outside, it probably looked normal. Safe, respectable. From the inside, it felt like slowly shrinking. Daniel's parents never liked me. Not subtly, not politely. They tolerated me the way people tolerate an inconvenience they believe will eventually resolve itself. I wasn't impressive enough. Not ambitious in the way they understood ambition. I didn't come from the right family, didn't speak in the right coded language about money and influence and potential. His father had said it out loud once at a dinner that was supposed to be celebratory. "You're settling," he'd told Daniel, as if I wasn't sitting right there, as if I were an object being evaluated, not a person who could hear every word. His mother was worse. She preferred implication over insult. Comments about how hard it must be for Daniel to carry so much responsibility. Questions about whether I felt secure knowing how competitive his industry was. Compliments that landed like tiny, precise cuts. Daniel never defended me. Not directly. He'd squeeze my knee under the table, change the subject, tell me later that they meant well, that they just wanted the best for him. Over time, I realized something uncomfortable when they talked about better, they meant someone else. About 2 years before the end, Daniel started changing. He became distant in a way that didn't announce itself loudly. It was quiet, strategic. Less eye contact, less curiosity, more criticism dressed up as concern. He compared our life to others, other men, other couples, other women who seemed shinier, louder, more impressive. His parents fed that narrative constantly. Every family gathering became a performance review of my worth. I absorbed it longer than I should have. The message came on the Tuesday morning. I was in my home office halfway through answering emails when my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. I didn't feel panic when I picked it up. I felt tired. I'm done. My parents think I deserve better. That was it. No explanation, no conversation, just a verdict delivered secondhand. I stared at the screen longer than I expected. There was a version of me, an older version maybe, who would have called immediately, who would have begged for clarity, promised change, tried to negotiate my own value. But that morning, something inside me felt hollowed out, like I'd been holding my breath underwater for years and had finally been told I could surface. I typed back 2 words. Then go. He didn't respond. What Daniel didn't know, what his parents definitely didn't know, was that I had already started preparing for this ending. Not because I wanted it, and not because I was paranoid, but because 6 months earlier, things had stopped adding up. Money missing from our joint account. Charges at hotels he claimed were work-related. Late nights that came with the faint smell of someone else's cologne. Phone calls taken in the other room doors closed carefully behind him. When I asked questions, he turned them into accusations, told me I was insecure, controlling, imagining things. So I stopped asking. Instead, I started documenting. Bank statements, credit card records, receipts I found folded into jacket pockets, message timestamps, patterns. I hired a licensed investigator for 2 weeks in March, quietly, legally, desperately, because I needed to know if I was losing my mind. I wasn't. By the time that text arrived, I already knew the truth. About the affair, about the lies, about how much of my life had been quietly siphoned away while I tried to be patient, reasonable, understanding. I sat in that chair for almost an hour after sending my reply, staring at my computer screen without seeing it. Then I opened a folder I'd labeled months earlier, evidence. And for the first time since Daniel walked into my life, I didn't feel afraid of what came next. I felt ready. I didn't start collecting evidence because I wanted revenge. I started because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining my own erasure. 6 months before that text message, something subtle shifted in our finances. It wasn't dramatic, no maxed out cards, no bounced payments, just small discrepancies. A few $100s here, a charge labeled business dinner that didn't align with his schedule, a hotel name I didn't recognize on a night he claimed he'd worked late and slept in his office. When I asked, Daniel didn't explain. He deflected. "Why are you checking the account so closely? Do you not trust me, Hilda? You sound paranoid." That word stayed with me. Paranoid. It's an efficient silencer. It makes you question your instincts before you question the behavior in front of you. So I stopped reacting emotionally and started watching carefully. The money kept disappearing. Slowly at first, then with more confidence, like someone who believed they'd never be challenged. Charges at restaurants we'd never been to together. Weekend expenses during conferences that never seemed to produce notes, contacts, or follow-ups. And always, always the defensiveness. The way he turned the conversation around until I was the one apologizing for asking. The smell was what finally cracked it. He came home one night past midnight, jacket tossed casually over a chair tie loosened, expression relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. When he leaned in to kiss my cheek, I smelled perfume layered under his cologne, something floral, expensive, not mine. "You changed your soap?" I asked lightly. He stiffened, just for a second. No, office must have smelled weird today. That was when I knew. Not because of the lie, but because of how rehearsed it felt. Her name surfaced quietly after that. Marissa Langley, his boss, confident, polished, married, a woman who spoke in decisive tones and commanded rooms effortlessly. I'd met her once at a company event. She'd shaken my hand, looked me in the eye, smiled like we were equals. We weren't. The investigator came into my life like a last resort. I told myself it was temporary. 2 weeks, just enough to either confirm my suspicions or free me from them. I needed to know which reality I was living in. What I got instead was clarity. Photos of them entering hotels together, sitting too close at restaurants, her hand resting on his arm in a way that didn't belong to a boss. Receipts that matched the bank statements perfectly. Dates lining up with nights he'd come home exhausted and irritable, barely able to look at me. The worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was how long it had been happening. Almost a year. A year of lies delivered with ease. A year of shared jokes between them about how naive I was. A year of my money, our money-funding hotel rooms, weekend trips, dinners, meant to feel indulgent and secret. Over $30,000. Money we'd saved for a house, for a future he'd already decided I wasn't part of. I didn't confront him when I found out. I didn't scream or cry or throw things. I sat at my desk late at night while he slept beside me, assembling the truth, piece by piece. I downloaded statements, highlighted charges, matched timestamps, organized text messages recovered from backups he didn't know I had access to. Some of them made me physically sick. Messages where they talked about leaving their spouses, about how much easier things would be once I was out of the picture. One message from her read, "She actually believes you're at a training seminar. That's kind of sad." Another from him, "She trusts me completely." Trust, like it was a weakness, like it was something to exploit. I cried once during that process, just once. Then something hardened inside me. Not anger exactly, but resolve. The kind that arrives when grief has burned itself out and left something sharper behind. By the time Daniel sent that text, I wasn't scrambling to understand what had happened. I already knew. What I hadn't decided yet was how much of the truth the rest of the world deserved. After an hour of staring at my screen, I opened a new document. Then another. Then another. I compiled everything into a single file, every receipt, every photo, every text exchange, every highlighted withdrawal from our joint account. I organized it chronologically, added a table of contents, labeled each section clearly. Professional, clean, undeniable. 127 pages. When it was finished, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, heart racing not from fear, but from anticipation, because I knew what this document represented. Not just evidence of betrayal, but protection. Insurance against the version of events Daniel and his parents were already preparing to sell. They were going to paint me as controlling, paranoid, emotionally unstable, a woman who drove a good man away with suspicion and insecurity. I wasn't going to let them. I opened my email and typed 3 addresses. Daniel's parents, his older sister, and Andrew Langley, Marissa's husband. The subject line was simple: the truth about your son's sister-wife. The body of the email was even simpler. Attached is documented evidence of a year-long affair. All transactions were made using funds from our joint account. I thought you should know who you're defending. I didn't add emotion. I didn't add commentary. The truth didn't need embellishment. I hit send at 2:47 p.m. For a moment, nothing happened. The world didn't shift. The house didn't shake. I sat there listening to the hum of my computer, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it already knowing who it was. I let it ring once more before answering. Hello? The voice on the other end was older, tighter, barely controlled. Is this really true? Daniel's father. Every receipt, I said calmly. Every photo, every message, all dated. Silence, long and heavy. She told us you were controlling, he finally said. That you monitored her every move, that you were emotionally abusive. I laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, just enough to let him hear how absurd it sounded now. I'm sure she did, I replied. Did she mention the hotel rooms she booked on our anniversary? The line went quiet again. That was when I knew. The narrative they'd been preparing had collapsed before it ever left the room, and the fallout hadn't even begun yet. The silence after that phone call didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the pause before impact. I ended the call without ceremony. No goodbye, no reassurance. I didn't owe Daniel's father comfort. Not after years of being treated like a temporary inconvenience his son would eventually outgrow. I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to work, answering emails like it was any other afternoon. At 3:23 p.m., my phone rang again. This time I recognized the number immediately. Daniel. I let it ring. It rang again and again. Then the messages started coming in rapid succession, stacking on top of each other like falling dominoes. What did you do? My parents are calling me nonstop. Andrew's wife won't stop calling Marissa. You crossed a line, Hilda. I waited until the shaking in my hands stopped before I finally answered. What did you do? He shouted the second I picked up. His voice was high-panicked, stripped of the calm authority he'd worn for months. My parents are losing their minds. Andrew's wife is calling my office. You ruined everything. I sent the truth, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. That's all. You had no right, he snapped. That was private. That was between us. No, I replied. It stopped being private when you spent $30,000 of our money on your affair. He inhaled sharply like he'd been punched. You don't understand, he said, his tone shifting, softening, reaching for control. It wasn't like that. Marissa, she has power over me. She pressured me. I didn't know how to say no. I closed my eyes, not because his words hurt, but because they were so painfully rehearsed. That's strange, I said quietly, because the messages show you initiating most of it. Booking the hotels, making the plans, laughing about how clueless I was. That's out of context. It's documented, I said. Every lie, every dollar, every night you told me you were working late. He went silent. Then the anger came flooding back. You're trying to destroy me, he yelled. You're doing this because you're bitter, because you couldn't handle that I wanted something better. No, I said evenly. I'm doing this because you want it out, and I refuse to let you turn me into the villain to make it easier. You could have just let me leave. You left months ago, I replied. I just made sure everyone knew why. He started crying then, full, ugly sobs that bounced between rage and self-pity. You don't know what you've done, he said. My parents are humiliated. Andrew's threatening to take everything from Marissa. My job. You should have thought about that. I interrupted, my voice suddenly sharp, before you used our savings to fund your double life. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the gears turning, the calculation returning. Let's talk about this in person, he said finally. This is a family matter. No, I said. It's a legal one now. You can't do this, he snapped. I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them how controlling you were, how you monitored me. Go ahead, I said. I have receipts. You have stories. He cursed under his breath, then quieter, almost pleading, please, just fix this. I thought about all the times I'd fixed things before. Smoothed tensions. Apologized when I wasn't wrong. Absorbed discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. I'm done fixing things for you, I said. He hung up. The calls didn't stop after that. 17 times in the next hour. Voicemails I didn't listen to. Texts I didn't open. When I finally blocked his number, I felt something close to relief. That night, my doorbell rang at 7:04 a.m. sharp. I didn't answer it. I stood in the hallway, heart pounding, listening as Daniel's mother pounded on the door like she could break through it with sheer will. You vindictive little monster, she screamed through the wood. You're destroying our family. I didn't move. I called the police instead. By the time they arrived, she was crying, ranting, pointing at the house like it was a crime scene. They escorted her off the property and warned her not to return. A report was filed. Her humiliation was official. That afternoon, Daniel's older sister called. Unlike the rest of them, she didn't yell. Hilda, she said slowly, I'm not calling to attack you. I just need to know. Is it all true? Yes. A long exhale. Jesus, she murmured. He told us you were the problem. That you isolated him, controlled the money, that Mom and Dad needed to help him get out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling again. They were ready to rescue him, she continued. Now, they're embarrassed. Dad's business partners somehow got the email. The country club is buzzing. They're worried about their reputation, I said, not what he did. Yes, she admitted quietly. I'm sorry, she added after a moment. You didn't deserve this. Thank you, I said, And for the first time, I meant it. 3 days later, someone else reached out. Andrew Langley's wife. She asked if we could meet neutral ground, a coffee shop far from both our neighborhoods. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her from the photos. She looked exhausted, thinner, like someone who'd been holding herself together with sheer will. "Thank you for sending that," she said once we sat down. Her voice barely carried. "I suspected something for months. He kept telling me I was paranoid." That word again. We talked for over an hour, compared timelines, lies, excuses that mirrored each other almost perfectly. When she told me she was filing for divorce and that it wouldn't be quiet, I believed her. The lie that had protected them both was gone. And now everything was going to start costing money. Consequences don't arrive loudly. They show up methodically, one sealed envelope at a time. 2 weeks after the email went out, Marissa was escorted out of her office building in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. Security walked on either side of her, close enough to make it clear she wasn't in control of the pace. A cardboard box held the contents of her desk, framed photos, a leather notebook, a mug that read, "Boss Energy." Someone from HR followed behind face-tight eyes forward. Daniel texted me from an unfamiliar number when it happened. They fired her. I didn't reply. What Andrew's wife had done was efficient and devastating. She'd forwarded everything, the photos, the messages, the receipts, directly to HR and the company's legal department. The affair alone would have been enough. But using company cards for hotels, logging personal trips as business travel, abusing power dynamics with a subordinate, that turned it into a liability nightmare. The company moved fast. They always do when reputation is on the line. Daniel lasted 3 more hours. They didn't fire him outright, not officially. Instead, they eliminated his position. A carefully worded phrase designed to reduce lawsuits while achieving the same result. He was walked out quietly 3 hours after Marissa carrying his own box of things. The symmetry would have been funny if it hadn't been so cruel. He called me that night. I didn't answer. His parents hired a lawyer within days, an expensive one, the kind that billed aggressively and spoke confidently until facts entered the room. They tried to build a case around privacy violations, claimed I'd invaded Daniel's accounts, that I'd stalked him, that I'd harassed the family by sending that email. My lawyer dismantled it in under an hour. Joint accounts mean joint access. Marital communications aren't protected. The investigator operated within legal limits, no trespassing, no wiretaps, just observation in public spaces. And truth, no matter how inconvenient, isn't defamation. When their lawyer asked if I was prepared to take this to trial, my attorney slid the printed bank statements across the table and asked if they really wanted those details entered into public record. They didn't. The $30,000 Daniel had spent on the affair was deducted from any claim he might have had. Their argument for half of everything evaporated quickly after that. Reputation has a price, and his parents weren't willing to pay it publicly. Daniel moved back in with them. He started posting vague quotes on social media about toxic relationships, narcissistic abuse, and escaping manipulation. I didn't respond. I screenshot everything and said nothing. Silence, my lawyer reminded me, was my safest weapon. Friends I hadn't heard from in months started reaching out quietly. Some apologized. Some admitted they'd believed his version of events. One said she'd noticed the changes in him, but didn't want to get involved. I didn't hold it against them. Lies spread faster when they're convenient. Andrew's wife filed for divorce the same week I did. She told me she was done pretending, done prioritizing stability over truth. When she spoke, there was no anger in her voice, just resolve. Her case moved faster than mine. By the time our divorces were finalized 4 months after that original text, the outcomes were clear. I kept the house. I kept my retirement accounts. I kept the car we'd bought together. Daniel got his personal belongings and a car he was still making payments on payments he could barely afford without his old salary. Andrew lost more than that. His wife was awarded full custody. The house, a substantial settlement. The judge wasn't sympathetic to someone who'd used company resources to sustain an affair while gaslighting his spouse. Last I heard, he was living in a 1-bedroom apartment across town, working at a smaller firm for half the pay. His kids refused to see him. After the paperwork was signed and the dust settled, something unexpected happened. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but quiet. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. I sold some investments I'd been sitting on and booked a flight without overthinking it. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from while trying to hold a failing relationship together. I slept better, ate better, Started feeling like myself again, not the version of me constantly bracing for criticism. Andrew's wife and I stayed in touch. At first, it was just checking in. Updates about court dates, custody hearings, logistics, but somewhere along the way, the conversation softened, shifted. We understood each other in a way most people couldn't. What it felt like to be lied to convincingly, to doubt your instincts, to have your reality questioned until you started questioning yourself. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just an ease that surprised us both. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something I needed to defend myself against. It felt open. Healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in quietly disguised as routine. For a while after the divorce was finalized, my life looked almost boring from the outside. I worked. I cooked. I took long walks without headphones just to hear my own thoughts. I rearranged the furniture in the house Daniel and I had shared, not dramatically, just enough to erase the outlines of where his presence used to be. New paint, new shelves, new memories layered carefully over old ones. Daniel, meanwhile, unraveled publicly. He moved back into his parents' house and stayed there far longer than anyone expected. His social media turned into a stream of half-formed confessions and accusations posts about emotional trauma being misunderstood and what happens when you love someone who only sees control. He never used my name. He didn't have to. People knew. I never responded. My lawyer had warned me that silence would frustrate him more than any rebuttal. She was right. Every time he escalated a longer post, a sharper accusation, my refusal to engage made the narrative collapse under its own weight. Screenshots went into a folder, evidence just in case. A few of his friends reached out privately. Some apologized outright. Others asked careful questions, clearly trying to reconcile what they'd been told with what they were now seeing. I answered honestly, briefly, and without emotion. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. The truth had already done its work. Around that time, Andrew reached out cautiously, almost awkwardly, and asked if I wanted to meet for dinner. Not coffee. Dinner. The difference mattered. I hesitated longer than I expected. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. We were both damaged in similar ways, still figuring out who we were without the weight of betrayal pressing down on us daily. The last thing either of us needed was to rush into something because it felt familiar. Still, curiosity won. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, somewhere neutral, dimly lit, unassuming. When I saw him, I noticed the changes immediately. He looked lighter, healthier. The constant exhaustion I'd seen during our first meeting had faded. I wanted to thank you again, he said after we ordered, for the email, for not sugarcoating anything. I think I needed that jolt. I did too, I admitted. We talked for hours, about therapy, about rebuilding trust not in other people, but in ourselves, about how strange it felt to start over at this age when we'd both assumed our lives were already mapped out. He told me his ex-wife had tried to reconcile, sent flowers, showed up unannounced, begged him to reconsider for the kids' sake. He'd refused, told her to leave, and threatened a restraining order if she didn't. The kids are angry, he said quietly, and that breaks my heart, but they understand why we couldn't stay together. I understood that pain in a way few people could. We started seeing each other slowly after that. No labels, no pressure, just dinners, walks, long conversations that didn't feel like auditions for permanence. It was easy in a way my relationship with Daniel never had been. Not because it lacked depth, but because it lacked manipulation. Meanwhile, Daniel tried to re-enter my life. It started with an email, long, rambling, full of apologies and explanations that contradicted each other. He wrote about therapy, about how his parents had pressured him to find better, and how he'd tried to prove them right. He said he missed me, missed us, that he'd do anything to fix what he'd broken. I didn't respond. 2 weeks later, another email arrived, this one angrier, bitter, accusing me of being vindictive, of destroying his life, of refusing to forgive when forgiveness was the mature thing to do. He claimed I'd never really loved him, that my silence proved it. I blocked that address too. A few months later, his sister called and asked if I wanted to get coffee. We met downtown, far from anywhere we might run into family. She looked tired. He's not doing well, she admitted. Lost another job, drinking a lot. Mom and Dad are worried. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said gently. I know, she replied. I just thought you should know. I appreciated her honesty, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just distance. Daniel felt like someone I'd known in another lifetime, a character whose arc had ended. For the first time since everything fell apart, I didn't feel defined by what I'd survived. I felt defined by what I was building. And it was enough. I used to believe that endings were clean, that once something was finished, it stayed that way, boxed up, labeled, stored somewhere you didn't have to revisit unless you chose to. I was wrong. Daniel didn't let go easily, not because he loved me, but because he couldn't stand being alone with the version of himself that had been exposed. Losing the marriage was one thing. Losing the narrative, the story where he was misunderstood, pressured, unlucky, that was unbearable. It started subtly again. It always did. A new email address. A short message this time. No apologies, no accusations, just a single line asking how I was doing, as if we were old colleagues checking in after a layoff. I deleted it without responding. Then he tried my family. My mother mentioned it casually over the phone one evening, her tone careful. Someone messaged me today, she said. Daniel. He said he wanted to apologize, asked if you were happy. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with irritation. You didn't reply, did you? I asked. No, she said immediately. I told him to leave us alone. That was the moment I realized he wasn't looking for reconciliation. He was looking for access, any crack he could slip through to reinsert himself into a life that had moved on without him. A week later, my security camera sent a notification while I was out with friends. Motion detected front porch. I opened the app and felt my stomach drop. Daniel stood there, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, hair longer than I remembered. Posture slouched like someone who had run out of places to go. He rang the bell once, then again. Then started knocking, not violently, but insistently, like he believed persistence alone might rewrite history. He stayed for nearly an hour. The camera caught everything. The pacing, the pleading phone calls, the moment he sat down on the front steps and buried his face in his hands. When he finally left, it wasn't with dignity. It was with defeat. I filed another police report that night. The next day, the police went to his parents' house and warned him directly. Any further contact would result in arrest for trespassing and harassment. Official, documented, final. His father called me that evening. No greeting, no preamble. You need to talk to him, he said flatly. He's falling apart. No, I replied. He needs to stop contacting me. He needs closure. He had closure, I said. The divorce was finalized months ago. You're being cruel, his father snapped. He still loves you. No, I said calmly. He loves the idea of not being alone. There's a difference. There was silence on the line, then something colder. You destroyed his life, he said. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but clarity. He destroyed his own life, I replied. I just stopped covering for him. I hung up. After that, the noise faded. Not immediately, but steadily, like a storm losing momentum once it realizes it's no longer welcome. Daniel stopped trying to reach me. His parents stopped calling. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. A year after that original text message, almost to the day, I was sitting in my backyard with Andrew. The air was warm, the kind of evening that feels generous. We'd blended our lives slowly and intentionally. He'd moved in months earlier. His kids came over every other weekend now. They were cautious at first, understandably so, but time softened the edges. We played board games, watched movies. I taught his oldest how to change a tire one afternoon when his bike chain snapped, and he panicked, convinced everything broken was permanent. Life felt peaceful. Then my phone rang. Daniel's sister. I thought you should hear this from me, she said, sounding uneasy. He's getting married. I blinked. What? Met someone online. They're getting married next month. Fast. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Good for him, I said honestly, and I meant it. After I hung up, Andrew raised an eyebrow. That was him. His sister, I corrected. He's getting married. Andrew laughed softly. Think he's actually happy? I doubt it, I said. But it's not my problem anymore. And that was the truth. 2 years is a strange amount of time. Long enough for wounds to scar over. Short enough that you still remember the shape of the pain when you touch it. When I thought about Daniel now, it wasn't with anger or sadness or even satisfaction. It was with distance, the kind you feel towards someone you once knew very well and now wouldn't recognize if you passed them on the street. Life had continued steadily and quietly. Andrew and I were engaged, not in the loud, performative way people announce milestones to prove something, but in a way that felt private and intentional. We were planning a small wedding. Close friends' family, no spectacle. His kids were excited. They asked if they could call me by a nickname instead of my full name. I said yes without hesitation. The house was the same structure, but it felt entirely different. New furniture, new paint, light in places that had once felt heavy. The ghosts were gone. Daniel's sister sent me a photo a few weeks after that phone call, a wedding announcement he'd posted online. Small ceremony, expensive venue. The woman beside him was significantly older, well-dressed, confident in a way that read as curated. Money, if I had to guess. Daniel smiled in the photos, but there was something hollow in his eyes, something familiar. I showed it to Andrew. You dodged a bullet, he said. I really did, I replied. Final updates travel slowly carried by people who still orbit a past you've already exited. Daniel's new marriage began cracking within months. He complained to his parents about being monitored, about his phone being checked, about being questioned every time he left the house. His father's response was brief and unkind. You made your bed. No one rushed to rescue him this time. Maris's ex-husband lost custody entirely the year after the divorce. The judge ruled that his behavior demonstrated poor judgment and a lack of moral character. Supervised visits only, once a month. The children didn't want to go. I didn't think about any of them often. When people asked if I regretted sending that document, if I thought I'd gone too far, I answered honestly, no. Daniel wanted to leave. He wanted everyone to believe I was the problem. He wanted to rewrite our relationship so he could walk away clean while I carried the blame. I refused to let that happen. Some people call that vindictive, cold, cruel. I call it honest. I wake up now beside someone who values transparency, who doesn't weaponize his family against me, who looks at me like I'm enough without needing me to prove it. The life I have now exists because I refuse to stay quiet and small for someone else's comfort. That text message, I'm done. My parents think I deserve better, was the best thing that ever happened to me. It freed me. I exposed the affair. I told the truth. I let the consequences fall where they belonged. And I would do it again, without hesitation.